So what's the purpose of this video? As you've already seen, I showed you my W-2, the 1040, the check that I received, and on top of that, a 1099 INT that I received directly from the IRS. So this is somewhat of a follow-up to what have I done with the information. The first three videos I kind of held on to for 6 months just because I wasn't 100% sure if I was right or wrong. Like the title of every video has said, do your own research. I may be wrong. Kind of in a situation where I still don't know if I'm right. I mean, everybody I talk to says that I'm crazy, I'm wrong. There's no way that I can be right. But I have submitted adequate evidence and proof to at least show the IRS that I'm right. And this is something that I can't really see goes any other way. Of course, I could be wrong. The IRS could just be waiting to come back and say, hey, by the way, psych. But the IRS uses Title 26 of the U.S. Code, which is kind of their rule book. That's the federal rule book on taxes. And the IRS is the most knowing entity when it comes to income taxes or taxes of people and who is and is not subject to a tax. So, quick recap. My W-2 showed $8,200 and some change. That was what I made for the entire year of 2017. On my 1040, I filed 0 for income, wages, compensation, or whatever the situation is, however you want to use the verbiage or wordage. I submitted documentation that I believe is adequate proof that I know I am not a subject of this individual income tax return, and it is not a requirement for me to do so. I got a check back. The check back was for $8,300, which was $74 or $76 and some change worth of interest. When I got the check back, I thought I was going to have a sense of relief. I'm right, I won. I had a lot of sleepless nights over this, so I thought getting a check in the mail would have been the thing to just end all of my worry, my doubt. No. It was worse because I got the check, but I didn't get an explanation. I didn't get a, hey, you were right, or no, you're wrong. It was just a check in the mail plus X amount of dollars in interest. So what I thought was going to be victory and I can celebrate turned out to be really bittersweet because it's still the, am I right or am I wrong? Because remember, if I'm right, we've never been taught anything about this. This started in 1942 when all those old people that you know told you, yeah, I remember when it started and it was supposed to be a temporary thing, but it never went away. It did go away 2 years later when the victory tax was repealed. If I'm right. I may be wrong though, but if I'm right, I have submitted adequate proof to show that a company, corporation, or an entity operating in privilege, which would be a business, and those within government, whether it be federal or state, are the only ones required to pay a tax on their compensation and or income, unless you do stocks and bonds, or you have investments where you actually do generate income, because then it falls under the 16th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, where Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on income from whatever source derived. Bittersweet. Because like I said, there was no explanation. It was just a check. A lot of people were very surprised that I got the check. I got a couple of guys that I work with who are in their 50s, their 60s, and they've never heard of it before. I have a buddy's mom who does some accounting, never heard of that before. I was in a very strange situation, basically. And I still am. I got the 1099 INT in 2019. Because remember, my 1040 was for the tax year of 2017. I received the check in 2018. I got a 1099 INT in 2019 because a company or organization paid me $76 worth of interest. The 1099 INT's purpose is when you have stocks, bonds, mutual funds, or any investment that you pulled some type of money out of. It's still bittersweet because my interpretation of it is I was never supposed to pay this money. And when I got the money back, the interest that they paid me is actually considered income because they're technically stating that it was an investment account. Now, I only got $76. They probably got a higher interest rate or whatever the situation is. It doesn't matter because anybody who knows anything knows that the person who you invest the money with always turns a higher profit than you turn. You just happen to get a small chunk of change. But that's a totally different subject. The kicker. Throughout all my tax research, knowledge, evidence, whatever you want to call it, number one thing that stuck out to me, the W-4 that your employer first gives you, they're not supposed to give it to you. You're supposed to give it to them. If you ever look at a W-4, it says to give it to your employer. The only thing that any company, corporation, business, or entity that has employees is required to give their employees is an I-9 form that proves you can legally work in the United States of America. That's it. It's your responsibility to give them a W-4, not the other way around. The icing on the cake, I also filled out a Minnesota W-4 because any state that has an income tax has their own version of the federal W-4. When I found that, that kind of blew my mind because honestly I never knew anything about it. Asking a lot of people that I work with or associate with, they never knew about it either. So it kind of let me know that I was learning some stuff that I never knew before. And that's all this has been, a learning experience. But I may be wrong. If your employer is not supposed to give you that paperwork and you're supposed to give that paperwork to your employer, you voluntarily choose to be considered a taxpayer. You voluntarily have them withdraw money from your paycheck. Everybody thinks that it's required, but it's just become the norm. It's not a requirement. That's why they choose the word voluntary system. You have to voluntarily submit your forms for taxes and voluntarily this and voluntarily that. But then again, I may be wrong. So, why am I finally deciding to make this video and make every other video public? I feel like I learned enough that now somebody who knows more than me could actually reach out and, I mean, if you have proof that I'm wrong, please share it. If it makes as much sense to me as it does to you, or to you as it does to me, or whichever way you want to spin it, I mean, ask the question. Why? How? How did we get here? Why are we still doing this? For all the people who will say, well, this is just the cost of living here. If I'm right, it's never been the cost of living here. Our freedom isn't taxable. You can't tax somebody's freedom just so that they can say that they're free. That was where this all started in 1909, or actually in the late 1800s. It's because they tried to directly tax someone. They brought them to court because their rights were violated. And in the U.S. Constitution, it says there is no such thing as a direct tax without appropriation. I just happen to find all the information from the past. You always got to look back to know where you're going. Everybody tells you never look back, but you can't know who you are if you don't know where you came from. So with all the information that I've gathered and all of this, the IRS has never said that I'm wrong. But the state has. The state just blatantly said that I'm wrong. There's no way that you're right. I've submitted all this information to the state at the same time that I did to the IRS. But the state handled it totally different. They're saying that I filed a frivolous tax return and that I must pay them more money for filing a frivolous tax return. The icing on the cake is I appealed their order to pay this money. And when I appealed it as the appellant, I am required to provide proof that my rights were violated, which in itself seems to be backwards, because per Minnesota statutes and all this extra stuff, because they gave me the title of taxpayer, the burden of proof is upon me, which is always the hardest part when you got to defend yourself. You have to find the evidence. But when you ask them or tell them, look, if you can prove to me without a shadow of doubt, give me some documentation that says I am a taxpayer without no doubt, like just present me with the proof. Don't say that because the IRS says that I'm a taxpayer, because the IRS hasn't said it. When you get that title of taxpayer thrown on you and the burden of proof is shifted from the government, who's supposed to protect you, protect your rights, and protect everything about you, and they say now the burden of proof is on you to prove that they violated your rights, I think that's like, I may be speaking out of line or whatever, but that in itself seems like it violates all purpose of government. All I did was ask a question. Hey, what makes me a taxpayer? Oh, well, the 16th Amendment. Well, I've already submitted on the record what the definition of the 16th Amendment is, what income is per the 16th Amendment. That's wrong. That's incorrect on a federal level. I know that state and federal level employees are supposed to pay these taxes because of the Public Salary Tax Act of 1939. I submitted that within my appeal as well. I know that in 1942, people did have to pay taxes to support World War II. I submitted that on the record as well. I also know that in 1944, it was repealed, but it never went away. This is getting to be way longer than I wanted it to, but I mean, I guess now everybody can see what I've been going through. But so far, the IRS hasn't said that I'm wrong, and the state of Minnesota says that I'm wrong. Everything on my 1040 on a federal form was submitted to say that I have zero income, but it wasn't accepted on the state form because the Commissioner of Revenue has the right to adjust a taxpayer's form. But you can't prove to me that I'm a taxpayer. I appealed it. Instead of responding to my appeal, the Assistant Attorney General to the state of Minnesota filed a motion to dismiss for failure to state a claim. Within the motion for failure to state a claim, they said that it's a frivolous argument, that the IRS has already identified it as a frivolous argument. The state of Minnesota has already identified it as a frivolous argument. So there's no claim that relief can be granted upon, and blah, blah, blah. I submitted all of my evidence as a response, basically saying, hey, look, this is my correspondence with the IRS. The judge, during the motion to dismiss hearing, asked the Assistant Attorney General 2 questions. Asked me 1. It's not that amount of questions. It's just telling the story, because it's already getting longer than I really wanted it to, but might as well commit. The judge chose to convert the motion to dismiss hearing because she didn't rule on it whether it was a motion to dismiss granted or denied. It was converted to a summary judgment. With all evidence that was given, the summary judgment was ruled in the favor of the Commissioner of Revenue. I don't understand how, if the IRS doesn't disagree with me, the state can disagree with me when any legislation that is passed on a federal level trumps, no pun intended, the state level. It doesn't make sense to me, but that's where I'm at. So I have to appeal it to the appeals court and go from there. But I don't know, we'll see. This was just an update. It just turned into a way longer update than I wanted it to be, but this is what it is.